Hi everyone, hope you guys are all having a great day today, and in today's video I'm going to cover the whole entire market in terms of Dow Jones, Nasdaq, and S&P 500, including the economic calendar. Now I do post these videos up daily, so I highly encourage you to double check the latest video on my channel so that way you get the most up-to-date information. And before I get to the technical analysis portion, I'm going to go over the economic calendar. And for Wednesday, September 18th, 2024 at 8:30 a.m. we have housing starts as well as building permits. And then the most important thing is at 2 p.m. we have FOMC Fed interest rate decision, as well as at 2:30 p.m. we have Fed Chair Powell press conference. The market is pretty much anticipating a 25 basis points rate cut from the Fed. This is also based off of what Jerome Powell stated in the last speech, which should pop up right about here if you want to watch the replay. That most likely it's going to be 25 basis points versus the 50 basis points. And then after the inflation data came out, the market got a little bit more confident with the 25 basis points versus the 50 basis points. You could argue that the market was potentially thinking of a 50-50 split where it's either going to be 25 or 50. But after inflation data came out and before that, what Jerome Powell stated, it pretty much looks like it's going to be 25 basis points. Now you could argue that the market is trying to anticipate what will Jerome Powell state after the interest rate decision comes out at 2 p.m. Whether even though that he stated that now is a time interest rate cutting season kind of time frame kind of thing, the market wants to know how quickly and how often and how much they're going to cut interest rates. They're pretty much baking in two more interest rate cuts. The market is actually baking in two more interest rate cuts before the end of the year, one in November, one in December. So if the market gets what it wants, you could argue that we're going to pass all-time highs. And if it doesn't, we could potentially get a pullback. Now, in terms of indications, they were previously pointing to the upside. They still are somewhat. The shorter term, I would disregard this personally, but the 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month based off MAC lines, just to visually show you, these are MAC lines. They indicate if we're in a bearish or bullish movement. And the 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month are either in the bearish movement or about to cross over to the bearish movement, technically indicating for the most part that tomorrow could be a down day. But I would disregard that because of what's happening tomorrow in terms of the Fed meeting, so on and so forth. So usually I just disregard the MAC lines. Now, in terms of a little bit of longer term, in terms of like the 1 year, 5 year, and the all chart, they are still showing upside, but it's pretty much showing maybe a drop potentially. The reason why I state that is if you look at ETF SPY, ETF for the S&P 500, it's the same thing, just different ratio. 1 year chart, yes, in the bullish movement, but pretty much we got a red candle plus a red tick right now as well. And then QQQ ETF for Nasdaq, same thing, just different ratio as well. Same thing, red candle, red tick. Now, you could argue because the market is anticipating for potentially what could happen and then make a decision. And I would say that's probably the most favorable way to look at it personally. But overall, it's pretty much a coin flip. The only things I should say before I get to the rest of the video is that for the S&P, we're pretty much all-time high territory again. We did pass through it. So this was July of 2024, all-time high, and then August, and then early September, tested a bunch of times. And then now this is the middle of September where we're at right now, and we did pass it, spiked up past the previous all-time high, and then came back underneath for the most part to terms of resistance level, and technically again pointing to downside technically. But I would disregard the indications currently because the market is more just anticipating on what will happen and then make a decision off that. And then for Nasdaq, there is the upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010, like I've showed previously. I'll just quickly show it right now. Right about here, upward trend resistance line dating back to 2010. Mind you, the market was still going up. Doesn't mean it wasn't. It just got knocked down every time it went up. Broke through in 2020 to 2022, came back underneath, had issues passing it, and then this is where we're at. This is the July of 2024 all-time high that did pass it. So 3 months passed it, and then came back underneath, right about here, 2010. And I was assuming that potentially at one point we would get here before the Wednesday, possibly, but it looks like it's not even getting there and just getting stuck within the zone that I've shown previously in the past videos. Yeah, a couple spike throughs, but there was a couple spike throughs before too, and still getting pretty much stuck within this zone. That's for the Nasdaq. And then for the Dow Jones, it's creating all-time highs still. The only thing I should say too is that the Dow Jones is the strongest one in terms of showing potentially more upside. Now, mind you, the Dow Jones is only 30 companies versus the S&P, which is 500. But just to show you too, by the way, all-time highs right about here. But the most important thing to show is that for the 1 year chart, the MAC line is showing bullish movement. Yeah, red candle. But then if you look at the 5 year chart, this is the only one that's still showing two strong red candles versus the S&P and Nasdaq. So if I show you the S&P has not crossed over to a bullish movement, so it could still drop. And then the Nasdaq, I believe the exact same thing. Yeah, still has not crossed over, and you could argue that's pretty much a little bit arching down potentially. But again, I would dismiss these just for now, especially for the Nasdaq, because we haven't got to 2010 level, upward trend resistance level. But for the fact that the Fed interest rate decision has not come out, and then what Jerome Powell is going to say in the information based off that is not out yet and not available. Until then, that I believe the market will decide in terms of direction. Now, one thing to note as well, most times when the Fed does cut interest rates, yes, it does help. It's meant to help out the economy actually, in terms of the cheaper the money gets, the most likely that the companies will take that money to borrow to get a higher return on their investment. So in case interest rate, just for arbitrary number, was 1%, but the company thinks they could get 5% on their investment, they'll take that money, invest in research and development, hire more people, stimulate the economy, so on and so forth, and it is beneficial. But the market tends to take it as potentially, if the Fed is cutting interest rates, that is to stimulate the economy, because the economy is technically, hypothetically not growing, right? So that could be the case as to potentially why we could be heading down once the Fed says we're cutting interest rates, which they most likely are. Everybody's baking in 25 basis points to be cut. But if they act too aggressive, you could argue in terms of they're going to cut interest rates soon and aggressively, then you could argue maybe the economy is not as in great shape as we might assume it is, and therefore the market will react in a negative way, and so on and so forth. So it's weird situation, because the market wants a certain data points / narrative and get what they want kind of thing, but at the same time, if they get too much or too little, they could go down, and so on and so forth. But we'll see. But that's basically it for today's video. If you found it beneficial, consider dropping a like. It does help with the channel, so thank you so much for that. I do appreciate it. And if you want to be notified when I do upload my next video, consider subscribing and following so be notified when I do upload them. And that's basically it. Thanks again for watching. Take care. God bless and peace.